Hi, I'm David Austin, host of the Underground Subway, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Underground Subway podcast, a podcast that is dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that is giving you the tools and strategies that you need to live a better life, a life that's more free, a life full of liberty, a life that will give you and your family more freedom and more of an opportunity to enjoy a better life, a life of liberation, a life in which you can experience life to the fullest. The name of this podcast, as I always say, comes from the Underground Railroad. My grandmother was first cousins with Harriet Tubman. And one of the things that Harriet Tubman said that I always take to heart, she said, although I helped a lot of people to liberty, I could have freed a lot more slaves if only they knew that they were slaves. So many people were in bondage and they had no idea what freedom was. They had no idea that they were being held captive. They thought that their life was the norm for the entire world. And she said, if only they knew that there was a better life out there, I could have helped them. Well, that's what this podcast is dedicated to doing. It is dedicated to bringing to you quality and qualified guests who will reveal to you. You may be experiencing chains. You may be experiencing bondage that you didn't even know you were dealing with. And so our guests will reveal those chains, reveal those bonds, and then tell you through their expertise, the strategies and tools that they use to help us to be free. Here's another thing. I don't want to become free and leave my family in bondage. I want all of my friends and family. I want everyone. And so I'm looking forward to the next few minutes as we hop on this subway, this modern day train. The next few minutes, by the time this train pulls into this station on Purpose Avenue and Destiny Boulevard, when you hop off, you're going to say, we're all free and we're all ready to live a better life. I'm excited about my guest for this edition of the Underground Subway. Her name is Helen Gretchen Jones. Let me tell you a little bit about Helen, and then we're going to let her go. Helen is a unique individual because what Helen has done, Helen is an author, and what Helen has authored so many wonderful ideas. But one of the things about Helen is Helen is a certified death doula, initiative, and channeler. And I can't wait to hear about that. And she's going to introduce her new book, Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides. One of the things that myself and I'm sure a lot of you we've been dealing with lately is death and how to deal with grief. And all of us deal with it in a different way. And so her book deals with bridging the gap between life and the afterlife with a death doula's wisdom. And her book offers a unique blend of expertise, compassion, and spiritual insight, providing readers with profound and transformative perspectives on life, death, and the connections that bind us all. Drawing from her extensive experience as a death doula, coupled with her initiative, abilities, and profound encounters with spirit, she shares deeply moving stories and practical wisdom to help individuals. And so I'm excited to introduce to the Underground Subway and welcome Helen Gretchen Jones. Helen, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Underground Subway. I'm excited to have you on board. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to jump right into it because I'm just so whenever we talk about death and whenever we talk about grief more so than death, I think it's just amazing the type of different ways that we deal with it. And so first of all, after you talk to us about yourself, I'm sure some of our listeners may be wondering, there was a term that I used in your uh, introduction. What exactly is a death doula? What does that term mean?
Yes, so I am a death doula. A doula, people are usually familiar with the birth doula. It's a person who guides or assists. But with death, instead of bringing someone into the world, I'm helping them leave the world and enter into their next reality, their transition. So I would help people as a death doula to holistically transition. This is a newer type of need in our communities after a shift in healthcare that our country has had. With this big shift, nurses have had to, that used to be the nurse's role. They would sit with their patients, comfort the family. But now there's so much red tape and paperwork that even nurses have to do that it's filling up so much of their time, and they have less and less time to be at the bedside of sick and dying patients. So a death doula comes in and fills that role. You are sitting with that patient, you're offering comfort and your presence to both the patient and the family, if there is a family, and you help them and sit with them as they take their last breath.
Okay. I've got some questions. I'm just curious about that. But before I get into these questions, I'm curious because um, you said you sit, most people, when they hear about that, they immediately think about, okay, there's hospice because I work cancer research, I work in oncology, so I deal with hospice and et cetera. So people are familiar with that bedside type of thing. I'm curious, I'm curious, Helen, um, you said you'll sit bedside and instead of you helping to birth, you help to push out.
Mhm.
Um, and you've done it so many times. Number one, have you ever had to do it with family? And number two, have you gotten, because I've been to so many funerals in my lifetime that when my mother passed away, I found it difficult spending time grieving because I've almost gotten desensitized to it. Do you get desensitized to death and having to deal? Have you ever had to deal with a family member and you looked up and said, "Wow, I've done this so many times with so many people that I didn't even realize that this is someone close to me"?
Uh, Actually, not yet. So when I'm with a family, it does hurt a little more than whenever I'm sitting with a client or a patient that I'm just meeting or don't have a long relationship with. But I
Mhm.
will say that even with the patients I don't have a strong connection to, I still cry. I used to think when I first started that I needed to be the strong one, to not cry, to hold it all in. And
Mhm.
then that became really, really hard on me. It's hard to kind of mentally and emotionally process those kind of feelings if you don't let yourself release a little bit. And I found that when I allow myself to go ahead and cry a little bit, it, I don't know, it makes the families feel safe to be vulnerable too. So it's now sort of a tool in my own toolbox to be completely authentically present. And it does, make me cry a little. And then the family and even the patient open up and allow themselves to be vulnerable. And there's closure in that. And it softens the edges around grief when you can start to be vulnerable with your loved ones before they die.
Okay. I'm gonna step back because I'm curious. I had one encounter, and I'm gonna share this encounter with you. And I'm gonna step back and let you maybe explain this encounter and do your thing because I want to
Okay.
hear from you. I was in a room one time with a young lady who I thought had died, and the emergency team came in. They did the CPR and everything. And they said, "We don't have a pulse," and she's gone. And all of a sudden, boom, she sat up. The pulse came back. And when she sat up and got her breath and everything, she said, now this isn't me, she said that she saw herself hovering over her body and she was in the ceiling looking down on us and she came back down in her body. What happened? Talk to us about that spiritual side of it.
So, yes, we are souls or spirits using a physical body and earthly body as a vehicle. So, we do pop out and avoid the trauma that the physical body is going through because we don't actually need to experience that part of it. Dying is actually pretty easy, from what I'm told. I have had several shared death experiences, which is where when the person is dying, I am able to witness them leaving their body and travel partway into the spirit world with them and have that experience. But I can't go all the way. There's like, I
How
don't
does
know,
that
there's like a
happen?
block. How does that happen? Well, because we are all souls. And I think that we are all connected in that way all the time to our higher self, to God, to all that is, to the universe, whatever that is. We're all energetically connected. And so, whenever your friend or your person you were sitting with rose out of her body, it's because she didn't need to experience the trauma that her body was going to be going through, a little bit of that suffering.
Mm.
Um, Oftentimes, almost every single time I have witnessed the death of someone, they are already standing outside of their body before they take that final breath. Our bodies are like a vehicle. We hop in it for a little while. Some of us take it fast, some of us take it slow, some of us run it into the ground, some of us take it in
Mm.
for regular maintenance. But when it starts to putter out, we can hop out and watch from and observe as the vehicle putters to a stop. We don't coast to a stop. We don't have to just be in it to the bitter end. And so when we're looking at our loved ones struggling to take that last breath, or in your case, CPR and all that aggressive stuff that's happening, we don't have to be in our physical bodies to experience that. We pop out, we hop out, we watch from an observation point, and then if it's our time, then we will continue on to a different level or plane of existence that's moving at a different speed than the molecules of our human bodies. So we become aware of a different focused
Mm.
plane. And with her, she was time for her to come on back to her body. She wasn't finished here in this earthly world. So she had to pop back in. So it's sort of like that.
Okay. Mm. So have you had other experiences? How would you describe that? Because you mentioned that you shared that experience. What was that like on your part?
Well, actually, I will talk about Mrs. Wilma. This was a
Okay.
woman who was in NODA, which is a No One Dies Alone program that's offered through the hospitals and many hospitals. And Miss Wilma had family, but they were in several other states, and they could not come to Texas, which is where she was when she was transitioning. She was an elderly woman. She was Black, and this is her lesson that she was teaching. So when she popped out of her, okay, let me start with that. I'm sitting bedside with Miss Wilma and I'm holding her hand, and she's just kind of gently moving through the process of dying. She's unconscious. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a young girl walk into the hospital room, and I instantly know that it's a younger version of Mrs. Wilma. She looks to be about 10 or 12 years old. Her hair is braided or twisted into braids, and she's kind of in her Sunday best kind of dress. And she comes over and tells me this just kind of a download of information, or this overwhelming sense of information, that this has been like an overarching theme in her life, which was separation. She went through segregation through her life, and this was had a big impact on who she was as a person as she lived her life. And then now dying separation again from her family as she's taking her final breaths. So this separation and segregation played a really big role in her life. And she took my hand, and when she did, it was as though the hospital turned into this giant forest. I am in two worlds at once. I am aware that I'm holding elderly Mrs. Wilma's hand. I am also aware that I'm holding young Mrs. Wilma's hand in my other hand, and I am now standing in a forest. And she had the most amazing teaching that she wanted to share, which was that we are not separate, that we are not in any way separate, even though we perceive that we are. She showed me a tree. This tree has, roots, and it's part of this entire forest, but it also is a singular tree. And on that
Mhm.
tree, there are roots and there are branches and there are leaves, and every single one of those have their individual life, and every single leaf is its own life, and every branch and everything. And they all seem separate, but the truth is that they're all connected. And it doesn't matter. The leaf looks completely different than the branch, that looks completely different than the root, but they're all here together for one tree. And when you go back even further, that one tree is part of this whole forest, which is part of this other larger ecosystem. And so that was her big teaching. And it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had with Miss Wilma. So she took her life of separation and segregation, and then in her final moments before she transitioned, helped me to understand how we really are one, how we really are connected, and how there really isn't such a thing as separation. It's how we perceive ourselves and others. So it's one of the most beautiful stories. I have that story in the book, and she's an amazing teacher, profound experience, and I'm just so grateful that she took the time to share that with me before she died.
One of the things that I do on my podcast, and I'm just getting back into it. And I used to do it quite a bit. I used to open a can of worms, and I hope I don't open a can of worms here. But we, as individuals, sometimes I think we grieve in different ways, and I'm curious to know from you. Do you think that if more people could hear what you're saying, that it would help people not grieve, but cope better? Let me ask this question by explaining why I'm saying open a can of worms. Whenever someone passes away, I notice on social media, more people post things as if the person that passed away can read it. We post these long, I'm going to miss you. You were my favorite cousin, all the times. And we even say happy heavenly birthday and things like,
Mhm.
all the time. And I want to say so bad, they can't read that, right? Do you think that if we experience the what you're talking about, this connection, that it will help us not grieve, but cope with the transition better? I hope
Yes,
that
and
was a
I
good, I hope I explained that question.
yes, and actually I have a twofold answer for that. So yes, I believe that everyone can experience a shared death experience and can experience their loved ones' love and connection even after they transition. And I believe it's actually really, I think it's a birthright. I think we all have a connection to God, to all that is, to the spirit world, to our loved ones, and that never dies. Um, I believe with a little bit of practice, we can all do it. So I do it through meditation, but meditation is such a loaded word. You don't even need to use that word. It's just about just taking a minute, closing your eyes in quiet, and just kind of connecting to that inner wisdom within yourself. It only takes a few minutes. And when you start to do that, you start to get inspirations and ideas and feelings of love. And when you connect in with that, it makes it so much easier to connect in with loved ones who have already passed on or who are passing on. Now, when you are able to still feel that connection, you don't feel as alone. And it's being
Mhm,
alone that you really suffer in your grief, feeling like there's
mhm,
nobody, like you've lost something that you can never get back. Well, when that connection remains, you're going to miss that person's physical presence, of course. But when you feel still connected on a loving way, it does soften the edges of grief. Now, I connect with my team and spirit. Those are people who I believe are helpers for me. And this might be a little out there, but they told this goes in hand with your social media. Um, they suggested when I was worried about one of my patients, Mr. Arjuna, passing away and I wasn't going to be there, they said that I could write him a love letter. And a
okay.
love letter, yeah. So you could do it
Mhm,
physically with your hand. But what I do, because I'm very visual, I imagine this amazing, lush landscape that I knew Mr. Arjuna would love, a waterfall, just everything that he said he just really enjoyed in life. And I envisioned it. And I just loved him so much. And I just made this picture in my head and filled it with all the love I was feeling for him. And I left it there. And I said, this is for him when he transitions, this moment that I've created.
mhm,
And it's just a little clip of love. So when people write things on social media, their loved ones may not be on the computer reading it, but they're
mhm.
hearing the thoughts, they're feeling the love
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
frequency and vibration as they write it.
Mhm. And that's true. I thought about that as you were saying it because I actually shared with someone one time to write a letter to their loved one.
Yes,
And of course, that's what they're doing on social media. So I guess I
it
was,
is.
yeah. Talk to us about it. You discussed the concept. What it in you think it's called the Science Club. What is that about?
So Science Club is a group of deceased people that
Okay.
that I, it's a group of deceased people that frequently pop in during my meditations that give me information and guidance on how physics connects, the quantum world connects to our spirituality. So I didn't know who this one gentleman was when he popped in. I'm very visual, so I can see him with my eyes. And he was British, and I just Googled him, and his name was Paul Dirac. I've never heard of him, but turns out he's a pretty well known, he won a Nobel Prize. So, I mean, I guess he's known in the physics world, not in my art history theology world. So like so he came through, and he is always offering physics things for me to look up to better understand how we are connecting on a spiritual level.
So I guess the question is, and I'm sure will be asked is, okay, your title is a compassionate death doula. In order to do all this, I'm sure someone will say, wait a minute, do I have to be, especially when you talk about the science club, do I have to be do I have to do what we years ago they would call it, do a seance? Because that's what it sounds like the science club is. It's a seance. We sit around the table, we put our hands down, and we summons, and people come, and the table rises up.
Have you ever done a seance, David?
I've never done. I've just seen it on. I saw one the other day on Gilligan's Island, and then someone was under the table holding it.
Okay, so no, it's nothing like a seance. It's just a connection to, you can call it spirit, just our higher selves, God, all that is, universe, energy. It's really just vocabulary words, it's semantics at this point. But regardless of what it is and how it transpires in my mind, it is wisdom that I interpret, and then I write it down, and then I allow those messages, that wisdom, to shift in my perspectives and change my life in a positive way. So it's always loving, amazing information that comes through. So nothing seance, nothing crazy, nothing that's outside of the norms. In fact, I think it's very much the norms.
Do you believe that? Do you believe that everyone has had some type of experience with the spirit world, and they may not know it or may not have perceived it, or?
Absolutely, because you are spirit. You are a spirit
Mhm.
in a physical earthly vehicle. And yes, my husband is not a spiritual person, at least at this time, and hasn't ever been. And so he kind of listens and kind of rolls his eyes a little bit at me sometimes. But the truth is, he takes photos of sunsets, and that's where he finds his peace. And I think that's your connection to something greater than yourself. It doesn't have to be, you can find inspiration, something that excites you, like when you decided to start this podcast. That was probably a divine inspiration. And that divine inspiration is, like you said, your entire introduction. I want people to recognize that they're free. I want to share other people's stories to make other people's life better. That is divine. So
Mhm.
whether or not you're sitting down and seeing Paul Dirac in your closet or not is irrelevant. It's what we're
Mhm.
doing to make our lives better and the people's lives around us better, and it ripples out. That is divine.
Speaking of which, can going back to well, you mentioned the introduction, can losing a loved one, not having that proper um, farewell, can that be a form of bondage or keeping us in chains or not being free?
So if you lose a loved one that you feel you didn't get closure with,
Hmm.
um, yeah, absolutely. I think that can make us feel a little bit heavy, and it could feel weighted, and it could feel like something's not finished, and it can hold us back from, like if someone else is going to die, like, oh, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that again. I don't
Hmm.
want to repeat that. Instead of finding healing through, you know what? I need to work through this. And so,
Hmm.
yes, absolutely working through your grief. And if you are blessed with the opportunity to be vulnerable enough to find closure before that person dies, it's a huge weight off of your shoulders. And you start to feel like it's okay to be authentic and genuine and vulnerable without fear of judgment, but you have to stand in your own truth to do that. And it can be scary, but taking the steps and doing it before someone dies
Hmm.
is maybe the best time. They can't judge you for long,
Hmm.
just get
Yeah.
it all out.
So
Um,
you're not actually talking about grieving where we cry. You're talking about closure. Is there a difference in grieving and closure?
I would say yes. I
And
would say
let me time out. Okay, I've got to do this. I haven't done podcasting in a while. Matter of fact, you were one of the first ones I'm actually doing video. I used to do audio, and I'm going to ask you this question before we close because I used to say this every podcast. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, one of my favorite movies is called Philadelphia, starring Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks. There's a scene in Philadelphia in which Tom Denzel Washington is an attorney and he asks a witness a question and he says, "Explain it to me like I'm a 6 year old." I'm going to ask you, explain it to me like I'm a 6 year old. What is the difference between grieving and closure? Because I know people who have lost one of the things that I fear the most. I was adopted. I know was raised by an adopted mother, and I knew my biological mother, and both of them have passed. I have lost both mothers. I have lost siblings, uncles, aunts. The one thing I have friends who have lost children, and that is to me is unimaginable. I have friends and they lost their children years later, they're still grieving. They're still, you know, what is the difference between grieving and closure?
Closure
Like I'm
is
a
the
6 year old.
okay. Grieving is something you're always going to do if you lose anything, a job, a loved one, whatever it is, you're going to go through a grief process. It's the loss of something that you put a lot of your energy and love and time into. The loss of a loved one can linger for the rest of your life. You're not looking for removing grief completely, necessarily. You're looking for a different way of looking at it, okay? Where you're not hurting constantly, where you have that knot in your chest and in your throat for an extended period of time. You want to move through that. Closure is saying what you need to, offering forgiveness if you need to, telling someone how much you love them before they go so that you feel better about giving them a good death, or you feel better about offering yourself with no regrets, everything you needed to get done before that person transitioned. Having closure lessens the grief. It softens it a little bit, but you're still going to have the grief. I would suggest for anyone who has lost a child, there's an amazing organization that's national and moving into international waters now. It's called Helping Parents Heal. And for
Okay.
any listeners out there who have lost a child or know someone who has, and if they're ready to look into that a little bit, it's amazing healing opportunities from people all over the now world who have lost children and how they're the tools that how they're coping and coming to
Mhm.
terms with that. So that's just a little side note.
That is powerful and much needed because I think that the support that we get from one another is very important. And so your suggestion is that connecting to the spirit world won't necessarily take away the grief, but it will assist with the closure.
Yes. Now, if you lose a loved one, like you lost your mother's, and
Hmm.
you were able to sit down and with someone who could evidentially connect to your mother's and bring through evidence
Hmm.
that you can't say, you can't dispute in any way, it really it opens you back up again when that happens. You're like, wow, okay, maybe there is eternal life. Maybe my mom is still right here. And what message does she want to have for me? Those types of things, even though we don't ever talk about it, it's still kind of, woo woo and out there. But it offers so much healing in one session with an evidential medium
Wow. I'm
person who can bring
laughing.
that
I'm
through.
laughing because I wish we had 9 hours to talk about this because I have so many questions. Well, what about what about, you lose a parent or whatever, you're talking about that evidence, that connection. What about dreams? Can
Oh,
that
absolutely. Yeah. Have you had dreams with your moms?
Yes, and I mean, and I'm thinking, well, that's just me having thoughts of them while I'm asleep, because you don't know. I don't.
Well, one way to tell the difference between a dream and, say, a dream visitation
Mhm,
would be if you wake up feeling love, you wake up feeling, wow, I'm so happy to see them. You wake up feeling excited about that interaction. Um, Sometimes you might dream like, oh no, it's a horrible experience. You're having that's your fears
mhm,
that are wrapped around that death. But if it's a really good feeling and you're feeling really good about it, and you're like, wow, it was like they were just here. Oftentimes they will just kind of stare at you, or they'll hug you, or they'll hold you, or they'll tell you something. Even if it's just like something casual, you walk in the kitchen and there they are having a cup of coffee and they just look up and smile at you and it leaves you feeling so warm.
Mhm.
Those are wonderful dream visitations. And if it brings you any kind of healing or
Mhm.
peace or joy, wow, that's a gift.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, there's an old adage that says that time flies when you're having fun, and this has been amazing. I wish we had 9 hours to sit down and tell us how we could how we can get in touch with you or get our hands on your material and get more information about what you're doing and how we can tap into everything.
Sure. So my book is available on Amazon and through Kindle and through audiobook. It's Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides.
Yeah.
And my website is www.helengretchenjones.com. And I guess if I could just leave a takeaway message, and it would be that everyone here who hears this podcast can connect to something greater than themselves. And if they allow themselves the ability to tap into that just for a little while, a whole other world can open up to you, a world of love, a world of peace, and a world that encourages you to set aside fears to really step into the true power of who you are. So I encourage everyone just to take a few minutes and practice.
Wow. Well, Helen, thank you so much for joining me. I'm telling you, I really enjoyed this. This was just, it feels like we were only on here for about 5 minutes and the time just went by. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join this little small little podcast and just to encourage us and push us forward. And hopefully one day in the future we can, well, I have one more question before we go. Would you mind coming back in the future and talking to us again?
Absolutely. I would love to.
All
Thank you.
right. Well, as the late great Bernie Mac would say on his TV show, you heard her, America. You heard her. Well, thank you, Helen. And I want to thank all of our listeners, those that are watching, those that have watched this podcast. I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch the Underground Subway. Once again, I want to thank Helen Gretchen Jones for joining the Underground Subway. This train, I hear the music playing in the background, which means the train is pulling into the station of Purpose Boulevard and Destiny Avenue. And it is time for you to hop off this train and get to your destination. But there will be another train coming real soon, and we're going to have another qualified and quality guest to tell us how we can live a better life and how we can be liberated and how we all can be free. Again, I want to thank you. I want to thank our special guest, Helen Jones, for joining us. I want to thank you for taking time to join the Underground Subway. And before we go, I want to challenge you. I want to issue a challenge to you tonight. Before you go to bed, find a mirror. Look in that mirror. I want you to look eyeball to eyeball with yourself and ask yourself a question. Today, did I make this world a better place? Or did I just waste another day? You don't have any more time to waste, my friend. Make this world a better place. I love you. I appreciate you. And there's nothing you can do about it. We'll see you next time here on the Underground Subway.